say Pittsburgh, and then we're going to 7 o'clock.
Little air guitar.
Oh man, I didn't know that you were such an air guitar player.
I've had my moments.
Yeah?
I've never done it professionally, but I've tinkered with the air guitar.
I'm a professional air violin player. You might not know that, but when I get on the that might have been the wrong motion. Hold on. There we go. You can't see it because it's not full screen. But this is what I was doing right here. And you got to do the head motions.
I sense that being the screenshot that is used when this file is uploaded at the end of this episode.
Oh, heaven help us if that is the if that is what is used. We're getting a little reverb. I don't know why.
Oh boy.
Anyways. Stop that. I don't know what. Of course it happens when we first start. Anyways, hopefully it'll go down. This is fantasyinsiders.com. Insiders TV. I am David Kitchen, a.k.a. Soccer Dave on all the daily fantasy sites and on Twitter. You spell that SOCRDAVE. Thank you, AOL 1994 email address. And this is Drew Dinkmeyer. You might know him as Dink Piece across the industry. And he hails from My Fantasy Fix. And you can catch him on Twitter at Drew Dinkmeyer. It's sometimes difficult for me to basically think of because we all have our Twitter profiles as our DFS names, but you're all professional and stuff.
Yeah, I got late to the Twitter game. And when I started on Twitter, I just decided, well, I might as well just be myself. Because if I'm going to give fantasy advice, I'm trying to build a brand under myself and not a username or a handle. So when I did get started, it was Drew Dinkmeyer. And it will stay that way.
That just makes too much sense. I don't know why. I should have had my fantasy name as Kitchen Esquire, something like that. Instead,
all sophisticated.
I should have, because that's pretty much me. You look at me, and that's what
absolutely
screams is sophistication. But
fine, sophisticated, gentleman, intelligent.
Yes. Stop.
David Kitchen.
I will give you 10 minutes to stop that. When you think of like the daily fantasy names out there, and the ones that like you actually meet the person and they are like the total opposite of what their name suggests, or you see a picture of the person or a video of the person. Who is that guy for you that you're like, man, it's not who I thought it was? I'll go first while you're thinking of it.
Yeah, I got to think of that. Go for it.
This is a guy that I saw hanging around the college football circles last year on Draft Street, and I was like, whoa, who is this Hicksville hunk? And to me, it reminded me of some guy in like overalls with just a big beer gut that was just looking to play some fantasy college football because I heard it on the radio. So that's exactly what I thought Hicksville Hunk was going to be, just a hick. I didn't know Hicksville was something. I guess I never. To me, it was like a country hick. So that's why I thought of him being a hick. Have you thought of yours yet?
I'll go with Mr. Tuttle because I thought he was the Tuttle math guy who had gotten thrown off Draft Street. And when all you guys were like, oh, yeah, I was talking to Mr. Tuttle. And I kind of was like, you guys associate with that guy?
Yeah.
And I was real confused. And now that I've met him, I'm still confused. But at least I know that it's not Tuttle Math who got kicked off Draft Street. And you can't even type that name in chat because the guy was selling his 18-team teasers and his PFM model or whatever it was called that was giving all these great picks for his $1 and $2 games that he never played.
Yeah. It was, and so like when you type in Mr. Tuttle, it just says Mr. and then 5 stars.
6. You're right with 6.
Yes, 6. There's the whole silent E at the end. But yeah, so you have 6 stars, and he doesn't even get to do credit whenever he won the big qualifier the other night. everybody. I was trying to type in Mr. Tuttle, and if nothing was happening. But anyways, we're going to get to some picks tonight. We're going to get to basically the night's game, and then we're going to move on to the weekend game for those people that are tuning in maybe on Friday or Saturday, hoping to catch some of the fantasy goodness. As far as your weekend last weekend, how was it in the NFL circles? I know you said that you kind of faded Foles, and was that kind of basically how your weekend went?
Yeah, I had a good. I was in really good shape heading into the Sunday night game to do really well. I thought I was in great shape to have a good weekend, and I still had DeMarco Murray, Vincent Brown, Trent Richardson, and Reggie Wayne left, and Pierre Garcon across different, on FanDuel, Draft Street, and I just needed basically those guys to do what I thought they would do, and I would have had a very good week. And not one of the guys did what I thought they were going to do, so it ended up being a week that was another struggle for me. It was one of those. It was a weird week. It was like if you had one or two players, if you had Cam Newton, you were off to an incredible start. Or if you had I'm trying to think, Blackman, yeah, you got off to an incredible start. But a lot of the top plays or the most common plays were kind of middling performers. So you just needed one or two guys to separate yourselves. And the only guy I had that was sort of like that was Arian Foster, and he was pretty high owned. It looked like DeMarco Murray was heading towards having that kind of game, and then he went down in the first quarter. And that was the second week in a row. I had David Wilson the previous week on all my teams. This week I had DeMarco Murray on all my teams. And it's tough when you get a touchdown on the first drive, and you're excited. You're thinking this is going to be a big night. And then the guy goes down, and you're sitting there waiting for a quarter to see if you have any even hope of the guy getting back in. And then it never comes to fruition. I know that cost Mike a draft street seat. If Murray would have had another 10 to 15 points, he had 12 in the first quarter, in the first half of the first quarter, I think Mike would have won a draft street qualifier. So tough.
It was brutal, and like you said, it was brutal because he had the touchdown run that first game, but it was like the opposite prime time of what Mr. Tuttle had a few weeks before, because it was all basically everybody was waiting for these big performances on Sunday and Monday, and they didn't really happen, with the exception of Vincent Brown, or not Vincent Brown, Keenan Allen.
Brown.
This guy had Vincent Brown, and the only good thing is that I faded the Colts, except on Star Street where everybody and their mom had Andrew Luck. But it actually worked out better for me that the game was kind of low scoring. But I also had a lot of DeMarco Murray and Pierre Garcon. And the thing with me is usually I don't get like this, but I put all my eggs in the basket of either Aaron Rodgers or Joe Flacco. And by halftime of that game, I was like clinically depressed, and I had to go work. I had to go work out because I was like, well, I mean, everything is screwed. But like you said, it was a weird week, and so I had Jamaal Charles and Arian Foster as running backs and went cheap on the other positions, and that ended up working out. But there were some low scores that actually were able to cash in some of those 50-50 double up games. So hopefully this week is a little more consistent. We talked last week about it possibly being a weird week. I felt like I was due for a loss. I don't feel that way this week. I feel pretty confident about some of the plays, so we'll talk about that. As far as tonight's game, what are your thoughts about the night's game? Are you completely fading it like I am?
Yeah, I think if you want to get cute with any plays in tonight's game, I think the potential plays that are out there are Russell Wilson and the Seahawks defense. I wouldn't get cute with anything on Arizona's side of the ball. I really don't like the matchup for their offense. And their most intriguing player, they reel in with a snap count, which is Andre Ellington. So I'm not really excited about Arizona's side of the ball. And I don't expect this to be a high-scoring game in general. Marshawn Lynch had a really nice game last week, but was battling a hip issue throughout last week. And I'd be nervous about taking him just a few days after the two touchdown performance and kind of a bruising game against Tennessee. How good is that hip? I don't really know. Are they going to try to monitor his carries? I'm not really sure. That's why I kind of like Russell Wilson a little bit more tonight. But I am playing games tonight, which is unusual for me on Thursday nights, and I'm playing games without exposure to this game.
Well, I am doing the same thing, and I would agree. Marshawn Lynch on a short week is not someone that I am looking at. I really would. I like Andre Ellington. I'm not playing him though this week at all. Like you said, he's on limited snap counting. He's the backup running back. I'm hoping that they will be smart with him and actually give him some meaningful snaps towards the end of the year. You have Larry Fitzgerald with the hamstring issue. Also, like, are you going to trust someone that says he's, fully healthy, but with the hamstring, you just never know. And again, going up against that Seattle defense. So, yeah, if I was to play anybody tonight, it would be the Seattle defense for sure.
Yeah, the only challenge there is they're pretty expensive across the industry. I actually think this is kind of a tough week for defenses because the defenses that people are talking about streaming a lot are like Minnesota and San Diego. Both teams are on the road. I know everybody likes to pick on defenses against Jacksonville, but I said this right after that Monday night win for San Diego. This feels like a letdown situation, having to travel West Coast to East Coast for the third time this year on a short week after a big emotional win at home. I don't like that defense. I think San Diego can still win that game, but I think they're going to have to do it by putting up points. I think Jacksonville's going to be able to move the ball this week. So it's a little bit of a strange week for defenses. And because Seattle's priced so high, I can understand if people want to kind of get in there, get a lockdown top tier defense to start the week with and get Seattle. It's not the route that I've chosen to take, but given how tough I found it picking defenses, I can understand it.
Yeah, definitely. As far as any questions, if you have any questions for us, rather, feel free to ask them in the chat or just hit us up on Twitter, and you can reach us at SoccerDave, at Drew Dinkmeyer later on, or just direct them to at MyFantasyFix or at InsidersDFS, and we'll try to get back to you. Also, if you're watching this on the recorded version, you can always go to youtube.com/Fantasy Insiders to get the latest videos to see when those are up. Even if you're kind of tuning in later, that's where you always can go. Let's move on to some of the news items for this week. And one of those is that Nick Foles, the guy that you said don't believe in, is potentially, a lot of people are pegging him as a top 5 option this week. His price is still relatively cheap across the industry. Michael Vick said his hamstring is worse than he thought it was going to be. Is Nick Foles a guy that you are high on now after watching what he did last week?
Yeah, he proved me wrong. And really that whole Philadelphia offense, which I've been high on since the start of the season, I thought this was a tough matchup. I thought Tampa Bay matched up well in the trenches with Philadelphia's top-tier offensive line. And I thought Darrelle Revis could potentially take Deshaun Jackson out of the game. Now, the exact opposite happened. D-Jackson had a huge game. But I have a lot less faith in the Cowboys' defense being able to slow down this Philadelphia offense than I did in Tampa Bay's defense, which I actually thought heading into the game was pretty good. But they didn't play very well on Sunday. Nick Foles was great in making quick reads, getting the ball out of his hands very quickly, and getting it to his playmakers. And this game sets up to be a shootout.
Yeah.
You figure Dallas is going to have to throw the ball a little bit more without DeMarco Murray. More passing attempts usually leads to more plays per game because incomplete passes stop the clock. Philadelphia plays fast as is. So, we were disappointed with Monday night and Sunday night's games being slower-paced games, that there weren't a lot of plays for fantasy value. I think this game is probably the game that is most likely to lead in plays, because I think all the other games that are high-scoring games, there's reason one team or the other will try to slow the game down. I don't think there's reason either one of these teams will try to slow the game down. So I think this is your safest bet for the total living up to expectations from a fantasy production standpoint.
Yeah. I think that they're going to definitely be passing the ball a lot. Even playing a guy like Foles with LaShawn McCoy, we talked about that earlier amongst the Fantasy Insider staff. Typically, you don't play your running back with your quarterback. I think it's okay, though, because LaShawn McCoy is catching so many passes out of the backfield. I'm not sure if you saw, though, but supposedly Jamaal Charles' workload is going to increase even more than what it already has. Your thoughts on that? I mean, he's priced pretty high, but if his workload continues to increase, he's done pretty well with the touches that he's received.
Well, I mean, if you were Doug Peterson and you just watched the performance that Alex Smith just put out there against a Raiders defense that isn't that great, what would you say to the media?
Right.
I'd be like, yeah, we need to get Jamaal Charles the ball more
Yeah.
because I can't watch that anymore. And so that we had a Chiefs guy on our show last week, a Chiefs beat guy, and I asked him, I said, what happens to this Chiefs offense if Jamaal Charles isn't in it? And the reason I asked that question was because the week before we saw without Calvin Johnson how limited the Lions offense was. Now it was much better this week with Calvin Johnson back, even playing a limited role. But imagine what the Chiefs offense would look like if there was no Jamaal Charles this year. It would be horrific. It would be a train wreck. And they understand that. So they're going to keep feeding him as much as they can. Andy Reid isn't thinking about the long term with respect to Jamaal Charles' career or wearing him down or anything like that. So I think you can continue to expect a 25 to 30 touch workload almost every game. And if you look at his game logs, just from a daily fantasy perspective, he's caught at least 5 passes in every game except the first game. So right there, you're starting off with 2.5 to 5 points, depending on what site you're playing on. And since he's an adept receiver, those are going to be at 8 to 10 yards a clip. So you're really starting out with, somewhere between 6 and 10 points just on the receiving side before he even takes a carry. That's incredible consistency that it brings to the table. We talked in the past about guys like Matt Forte and DeMarco Murray and how many different outs they give you on ways that they can contribute fantasy points. And Jamaal Charles is the pedestal. He's the guy to look at for that right now. There's so many different ways he can score points for you on any given Sunday.
Yeah. I mean, I paid for him last week. And I mean, I plan on trying to pay for him this week as well, because he is one of those guys that are going. It's not like a Doug Martin case where you just don't know. Like, you don't know if he's going to get in the end zone. They are capable.
Or if he runs it down to the 1 yard line and then they throw a fade route to Vincent Jackson on 1st and goal from the 1. Not that I had Doug Martin in all my leagues last week or anything and was really frustrated by this, but I might have. Jamaal Charles is getting like 60% of the red zone looks, whether it's through the air or on the ground. So he's going to get pounded down there. And his price, it's not obscene anywhere.
Right.
Like Draft Street, which is the most dynamic pricing site, I think we could probably all agree. He's still under 15. Like, based on his game log, I expected him to start to creep up to 16, and he's still 14-something. Like, very affordable.
Definitely. And, I mean, with Draft Street, you can play guys that are, 4,000, 5,000. I love playing a cheap tight end on Draft Street. You can play that cheap tight end to let you have...
You love a cheap tight end.
I love it. I love the cheap... Wait. I see what you did there. Don't call my wife cheap. As far as on Draft Street, though, yes, you got me all mixed up. I don't even know what I'm going to do. As far as Draft Street, a cheap tight end that you might want to play this week. I'm looking over salaries right now. Jeff Cumberland is at 5,100. I mean, that's a little pricey for me. But that Patriots secondary without Aqib Talib, that's what I call him, Aqib Talib. And without him and Mayo and Will Fork, they might be hurting. So maybe Cumberland gets some dump-off passes. I'm not on the Graham train at all this week.
Yeah, Kansas City's a tough matchup for Garrett Graham, and then this announcement that Case Keenum is going to be the starter is concerning for all members of the pass game as well. The cheap tight ends that I like on Draft Street, right in that price area, are Tim Wright from Tampa Bay, who had a little bit of a breakout game last weekend. He looks like the number 2 passing option after Vincent Jackson, and so I think he's in a good spot against an Atlanta secondary that's been terrible all year. Last time we saw them on Monday night, it was Jeff Cumberland who was having the big game against them. So I like him, and I like Jordan Reed against the Bears. The Bears' defense has always been designed to let tight ends stretch the seam of the field and allow the linebackers to get depth and cover those tight ends. And the Bears just lost their starting middle linebacker, DJ Williams. They're going to have to transition back to John Bostic. And Jordan Reed ran a bunch of routes in the first half of the game, then kind of got shut down in the second half of the game. Very athletic tight end. I like him for a cheap play as well.
Yeah, I picked him up in my weekly league this week. He looked great last week. I mean, really, in that game, there wasn't a lot to pick out as far. Well, Alfred Morris looked good too, but RG3's performance was a little meh. But Jordan Reed looked really, really solid. Let's go back to the quarterback position. Is there one? I mean, last week, we talked about Peyton Manning, and you actually defended Peyton Manning having such a good game, and really your logic was the right logic because he did play all 4 quarters and played till the very end. He just
handed off a lot at the goal line.
And so let's chat though about Peyton Manning as a number 1 quarterback. Is he too pricey for you this week? I love his matchup.
Yeah, I'm still very comfortable with it, and I think a lot of people are going to be in that direction after the comments from Jim Irsay earlier in the week, kind of poking Peyton Manning. And I think a lot of people are thinking, well, this week he's just going to unload. I think Peyton Manning's still going to do the same things he always does, which is read the fronts and make the best play call associated with it. So I wouldn't shy away from Marshawn Moreno, even though Moreno just came off a big game. I think all members of the Denver offense on a weekly basis are going to be in play. It's just a matter of pricing. And I think actually last week helped the pricing situation for a lot of the wide receiver options, especially on a site like Draft Street. Pretty much everybody's under 13K. None of those guys are too expensive to play. So I think they're all potentially in play. Again, I'll stick to the same thing that I've said in the past with Peyton Manning and with top quarterbacks. I think they're better plays for cash games, 50-50s, head-to-heads, 3-man games on 1 quarterback sites. And I wrote an opening drive article on My Fantasy Fix and for our Fantastic subscribers as well, kind of detailing some of my reasoning behind that. But basically what the numbers dictated was the best risk reward when you measure out average point production divided by standard deviation of points is at the top tier quarterbacks. And while I don't think that's the best way to win big tournaments, I do think that's the best way to post consistent results in head-to-head scores. And I think those over time, where in a lot of situations with head-to-heads, you either win by having a good team or by not having a bad team. I think that's a good way to play it, is to pay up for those quarterbacks. So I think Peyton Manning's still top of the class this week.
Yeah, especially on sites like Fanduel, where he is. He's priced at a high salary. However, you've got Vincent Brown and Keenan Allen. Forget Vincent Brown. Okay, forget Vincent Brown. If you don't want to play him, that's fine.
He's going to do something good this week because I'm aboard the Keenan Allen train this week, and I've gotten this wrong every single week. So Vincent Brown is going to do something good. I won't have him in my lineup, so go ahead. But he's going to do something good, and I'm going to feel stupid about it.
Well, that's the thing is that, I was on Keenan Allen last week, and then Vincent Brown, or 2 weeks ago, and Vincent Brown looked so good that I was on Vincent Brown this week. So I'm 0 for 2 as well, but Keenan Allen at 4,500, Vincent Brown at 4,500. That's a little discouraging on a site like FanDuel that has such limited flexibility. You and I both really like Draft Street. I also have been a fan of Fantasy Feud this season because they have a sharper pricing model with higher variance. So it doesn't hurt that I'm third in their Champions League. I think
You and Mr. Tuttle are doing really well.
I didn't want to brag on him because
Fantasy Insiders represent.
I thought you would get jealous, but yes, he is number 1 and clearly number 1 there on Fantasy Feud. But I like sites.
Hey, I don't get jealous. I know exactly what it's like to ride someone else's coattails. I did it all baseball season. So go ahead, ride away, my friend. Ride away.
Oh, exactly. He is red hot, and I will ride his coattails. They're nice coattails if you haven't seen it before either. But I like a challenge as far as creating a lineup, and on this week there's going to be 1 less roster spot with less flexibility on FanDuel. With that, and what they do is basically they price before the Monday night game. So unfortunately, those 2 wide receivers are staying at 4,500. Are there any other guys on FanDuel that you're liking this week, or have you even looked at the salaries there?
Yeah, I've got some teams together on FanDuel.
Let's hear it.
So you want to hear my whole team? Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Alshon Jeffrey at 5,900 is really attractive, and I think he's an interesting kind of Keenan Allen fade if you wanted to go in a tournament. And obviously Jeffrey has that big upside, but he's also another cheap wide receiver. One of the challenges of Keenan Allen taking up that roster spot is there's a lot of wide receivers in that sweet spot area that I really like this week. And it basically forces me to only pick 2 of them. You've got guys like Victor Cruz, Justin Blackmon, Pierre Garçon, Reggie Wayne, Eric Decker, all priced really favorably. And you can really only pick 2 of those guys because one of your roster spots is probably taken up by Keenan Allen. Alshon Jeffrey could be another guy in that group as well. If you really wanted to pay up for, let's say, a Peyton Manning or something like that, you can go 2 cheap wide receivers. Those are guys that kind of stood out to me. I think at tight end, Jermichael Finley is very attractively priced on Fanduel at 5,900. I think that's a good spot. Some other guys, a lot of people are going to be on Joseph Randle for Dallas at 5,500. I actually think that's a fair price for Joseph Randle. And I think there's enough value at other positions that you don't necessarily need to play him. But he does fit that offense well. He catches the ball well out of the backfield. He did that well at Oklahoma State. He's not nearly as adept of a runner as DeMarco Murray, and really he was the weakest runner they have in the preseason. So I'm not expecting a lot of rushing production, but he's sneaky around the goal line. He scored this past week, so I could see him getting his production just in the passing game and on touchdowns alone.
Yep.
I think he's a good value as well.
I really like Jeffrey. I like Cutler this week too, and I think a lot of other people do as well, and that is scary that a lot of people are depending on Cutler. There are a few questions I want to ask you regarding FanDuel. Number 1, Victor Cruz. He's burned me twice the last 2 weeks.
Third time's a charm.
Okay, he's at 7,200. We talked about that sweet spot. I really like him again this week, but I just don't know if I can trust him or if I am the curse for him.
Yeah, it's been frustrating. I've had him the last 2 weeks as well, and it hasn't worked out real well. The Vikings secondary has been so bad, and they've been beaten up by deep balls pretty much week in and week out, whether it was Antonio Brown, whether it was last week Brandon LaFell got behind the defense. They just have big communication issues, and I need to pull up the injury report because I thought I saw Harrison Smith on it this week. Yeah, he didn't participate in practice today. He's their best defensive back. He's more of a tackler. He's not great in coverage, but he's really their best defensive back. And that if they get another young safety in there, that's more potential for mix-ups and miscommunications. And I think that game in general is going to be a big mess because Eli has had all sorts of miscommunications with his receivers, but there's going to be people running free. And at some point, I think it's going to be Victor Cruz. He's a top 5 fantasy wide receiver still on the season, and at 7,200, he's not priced like that. So I'm going to be riding that train again.
And it's prime time, and you get to actually watch him in prime time. He can decide your matches one way or the other. He does like to salsa. That's a fact on prime time.
Yep.
So why not roll him out there on that same team? There's a guy who some people are fading. Mr. Tuttle's on record saying that he is fading this guy this week. He believes last week was just a dream. Are you on the same thought process as far as Brandon Jacobs is concerned on FanDuel? 5,500.
I feel like you're doing this just to make sure that Brandon Jacobs has a good game. Because last week, I said Brandon Jacobs, I thought he was a trap on Draft Street at 3,000, which is just an incredibly cheap price. And I looked like an idiot. And I'm hoping not to look like an idiot again this week. But I agree with Tuttle. Having watched that game very closely as a Bears fan, I didn't think Jacobs looked good. Everybody's talking about how Jacobs looked good. The Bears' defensive line was horrific. And I think Papa Cub, my father, was talking about this in the chat last week, that they were down so many defensive linemen, and it ended up being the right call, that they weren't able to defend the run at all. Now, Stephen Paea is back for the Bears this week, so maybe it'll be a little bit better, but I didn't think Jacobs looked good. And I know Minnesota's given up a lot of points to opposing running backs so far, but generally they've given up those points in the pass game to Matt Forte, and D'Angelo Williams had 50 yards receiving. Jacobs doesn't really contribute there. And they have some big bodies in the middle that can eat up space. So I think it, again, comes down to whether Jacobs gets one of these goal line carries. I would be shocked if he cleared 100 yards again. I think he's probably going to settle into somewhere between 50 to 70 yards, and then the touchdown swings the value. I think again more of the fantasy value will be on the passing side of the game. But I thought that last week and I was wrong, so we'll see.
All right, let's take a look and just do a little bit of what we like to call DFS role play, huh? Yeah.
I thought that last
Oh
week
yeah,
I was
you
wrong,
like
so
that.
we'll see.
I know you do.
All right,
let's take a look and just do.
Let's
a little
put together
bit
a
of,
$1
what
team
we like
and
to call
see if we can
DFS
ship this bad
role
boy.
play, huh?
I think.
Yeah.
I noticed
Oh,
that the stakes
yeah,
have been
you like
declining.
that.
We'll see.
I know you
Okay,
do. All right,
well, fine.
let's take
Fine.
a look and just do.
Let's
a little
put
bit
together
of
a $1 team
what we
and
like to
see
call
if we
DFS
can
ship this bad boy.
I think your record
Yeah.
I
speaks
noticed that
for.
stakes have been
you like
declining.
that.
We'll
It's
see.
okay.
All
Well,
right,
fine.
fine.
Let's see
What
if
do you
together
I'm
a
trying to find
$1
a
Thursday
team
night
and see if
game
we
can ship this
that is
bad
higher
boy.
stakes. I think your record
yeah.
I
speaks
noticed that the stakes have been
for.
declining.
It's
I
okay.
know
If we
you
took
like
an
that.
expert
Fine.
team
Let's
versus
see
the
if
money. Let's put together a
I'm trying to find
$1
a
Thursday
team
night
and see
game
if we
Yeah,
can
let's
ship
do that.
that is higher stakes. I think your record
Yeah.
I
speaks
noticed that they signed an NFL
for.
slugger
It's
discount.
okay. If we took
Fine.
an expert team
Let's
versus
see
the money.
if,
Let's take
$1
a squad
that
that
is
is higher stakes. I
I
think
think
your
your
record.
record.
Like a
They
$25
signed
an NFL
I'm
slugger
trying to
discount.
scroll down.
Okay, if we
Let's
see
what do you got?
let's take a squad that is higher stakes.
All right, let's take a head-to-head
Like a
versus
$25
Condia.
an NFL
Trying
slugger
to
discount.
scroll. Just see how this ends up. So $50 head-to-head versus Condia.
Yeah, it sounds like people in the chat are really enjoying the echo that's going on with the screen share.
Oh.
I'm not hearing it, obviously, but they seem to be loving it.
I know what it is. It's because I have the chat open I have the video open on my laptop. So yeah, we need to, let's fix that. Okay, fixed. Sorry. That's why you're my ears, Drew. So I need you to help me out with this because it's a $4. Not a $4. It's a $50 head-to-head versus Condia. So,
The king.
can you help me out?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's
Okay.
go.
Who is the number one guy that you're looking to take?
My number one guy is going to be Matt Forte.
I like it. All right. My tight end, that's who I'm going to go with, is going to be Tony Gonzalez.
Okay.
Because they talked about him being the number one option, and I think that he's a very important, since there's no Jimmy Graham this week, I think he's very important, and so that's why I will go him.
Okay. I'm going to spend a little bit here at the quarterback position for us. I'm not going to spend all the way on Peyton Manning. But I think Tony Romo is a really nice play, and at 8,800, I think that's a good price for Tony Romo this week.
Okay, so we'll go Romo. You didn't like Foles. That's understandable. I will go with get out of the way and go Keenan Allen.
Okay.
So we have three positions open basically at 21-4. So 7-1-3-3 per position.
Okay, so we talked about at one of the wide receiver positions. Do we want to stick with our Victor Cruz love?
I think we do.
And lock him
I
in?
think we do.
Okay.
So let's go Victor.
Yep.
And then let's also see. So basically we have 14-2.
I would also say I'm having a hard time with defenses at the 5,000 level, and there's a defense I really like at 5,200.
Okay, so go ahead and mention that defense.
Okay, I like the Ravens defense a lot this week, and the Steelers have had a lot of trouble with pass protection. The Ravens are generating more pressure than any other team in the league, and that was the case that was slowing Aaron Rodgers down early in the game before he had to start getting the ball out quick. I think it's a really good matchup. Pittsburgh, last week against a similar type team but less talented in the Jets, they were only able to put up 19 points. So I think it's a good week for the Ravens defense.
All right, so you've got me pegged a little bit, or not pegged. You've got me in a little bit of a corner now. So we have.
Well, you have to decide if we want to go cheaper at running back or cheaper at the wide receiver spot.
I think we probably want to go cheaper at the wide receiver spot.
Okay. I've got some guys that we can plug around the low 6,000s, high 5,000s.
Well, let's go with we talked about Jeffrey. Let's go with Jeffrey on the squad.
Okay.
So that leaves us with basically 8,100 minus whatever the kicker is. So running backs under 8,100.
The guys I like in that area include Doug Martin, and then Ray Rice, No Sean Moreno are also a little bit below that. I think Moreno is a good play at 7,700 to get some exposure to that Broncos offense.
Okay.
But Doug Martin might fit if you are uncomfortable leaving salary on the table.
I'm not uncomfortable. I would say play Martin or Moreno. I think Moreno has a good matchup this week. So either of those guys that you want to play, you can.
Let's go with Doug Martin. I think he's got a little bit bigger upside because he can break off some long runs, and I do think there might be something to the fact that Peyton Manning throws it a little bit more around the goal line. And if Moreno doesn't score, he really loses a lot of value because he's not a guy who's going to run for 100 yards.
Right. Okay. Well, with that being said, we have one more position. Let's just go with Nick Novak there at 5,100 against Jacksonville.
There you go.
Oh, crap. My lock on this opponent has expired. I better enter it.
All those other people that are going to be racing to take Condia.
Yes. So in order to be the best, you have to beat Condia. That's kind of how this works. And so this is the lineup. Let's see. We'll see how it does. But
I think that's a good lineup.
I do too. I really do.
I think each and every position there could have a 20-point game.
And that's important. It's a high upside. As far as a cash game, I don't know. I think maybe we could have done a better job if we really sat down and looked at it as far as creating a cash lineup. But this is a solid lineup, and I'm fully expecting to beat the pants off of Condia. Right?
As you do every week, right?
Well, I didn't want to say it, but since you did, then I cannot confirm nor deny. So as far as some specific plays, or not specific, let's just go with general plays, guys that you may like across the industry when you were constructing some of your teams tonight. Who are some guys that you kind of saw value that, like on Draft Street, Star Street, those sites, where you really like a player regardless of salary?
Yeah, Matt Forte, is who I started us off there with. And the Redskins defense has really struggled against every running back they faced. The problem for number one running back so far is they've gotten hurt early in the games against the Redskins. That happened with DeMarco Worry last week. It happened a few weeks before that, and I'm trying to remember who the running back was now. I'm bringing it up, and it's kind of eluding me. Oh, it was Eddie Lacy, who got hurt on the first carry of the game, and then James Starks went bonkers. Mm-hmm. So we've seen this a couple weeks. As long as Matt Forte can stay upright, and please God, let Matt Forte stay upright, I think he'll have a very good game. I think the Bears will be able to move the ball consistently. And even if they fall behind, as we talked about before, Matt Forte has the ability to contribute significantly in the pass game as well. So Matt Forte is one of those guys I am looking to.
Definitely.
While we didn't choose Nick Foles there, I do think on multiple quarterback sites he's a really strong play this week. As we talked about earlier, I bought into that performance last week, and I think it's a good one. To get players from that Philadelphia-Dallas game where you can, I think it's a good strategy this week.
Yeah, he is one of the top guys that I am playing across the industry. I would agree that he's a top 5 guy. He looks really solid against that Dallas secondary. He's going to do some good things. Another guy, maybe like a sneaky start, is Ryan Tannehill. I think he has a pretty decent matchup at where his price is. If you're looking for one of those GPP type plays, I think he is an excellent GPP candidate. However, I'm going to go. Foles is about as risky as I'm going this week. I really like Peyton. I like Andrew Luck. I think that they're going to be throwing the ball quite a bit in this game. It's going to be. I really think that Denver is just going to put some points on the board, and that Andrew Luck and company will we'll be playing catch up, and so I could see a lot of points for Andrew Luck. But Peyton Manning, I'm comfortable with taking him as far as on most sites with how depressed some of the salaries are. So
now we got a question in the chat from Euphoria. Thoughts on the Atlanta wide receiver situation? I'll let you start off there. You took Tony Gonzalez in that team that we just put together there, and a lot of people are going to be focused now with Julio Jones out, Roddy White really banged up. Harry Douglas is the name that's going to be on a lot of people's minds. What do you think about him as a player this weekend?
I'm fading Harry Douglas this weekend, and I just think that people, when they, as far as the whole injury to Julio Jones, Harry Douglas is not Julio Jones. So people sometimes have the tendency to just say whoever their backup is going to just immediately kind of fill that role. And there's only one Julio Jones for the Atlanta Falcons, and they don't have another Julio Jones in waiting. We've seen what Harry Douglas can do. Now, if his price, I haven't even looked really at where his price is on Draft Street.
It's about 6.
Okay, it's not bad. That really is not bad because last year I played him around when he was around 4,000 or 5,000, I remember. And so when he's at 6, I can't complain about playing him on a site like Draft Street that has such variance. But if you're on Fanduel, if you're on a site that has limited flexibility there at wide receiver, or that has a lot of cheap options at wide receiver, or guys that you need to get consistent production out of, I would stay away from Douglas. I like Tony Gonzalez. I'm staying away pretty much everyone else.
Yeah, I think Rafori mentions an interesting name, Drew Davis. And he's actually the guy who has seen time in the past when Roddy White has gotten hurt or Julio Jones has gotten banged up. And I think that's an interesting play. The other reason that I'm fading Harry Douglas as well is he's likely to be shadowed by Darrelle Revis. And so I don't think that's a matchup one-on-one that Harry Douglas can exploit consistently.
No.
I don't think he's talented or skilled enough to. So I think Drew Davis is interesting, especially on a site like Draft Street where it's just 3,000. We talk about the ranges on sites in terms of how the pricing differentiates itself. I'm more likely to take a guy, a real extreme flyer like a Drew Davis who hasn't caught a pass this year on a site like Draft Street than I am on a site like FanDuel that has a minimum price barrier where everybody gets grouped at the same point.
Right.
Just because there's less differentiation there from some other bottom tier names. On a site like Draft Street where there really is pricing differentiation, I'm more likely to take a flyer on a guy like that.
Yeah, and they talked about Tony Gonzalez being double or triple teamed. I don't think he's going to see triple teams, but he's a guy that is known for his route running abilities, and so I think in finding open space. So I think there's going to be some time passes where I don't think he's going to go all the way down the field for like a 50 or 60 yard bomb like Julio Jones is, but he's definitely going to get some balls in space. You know what I mean there. So Spaceballs. So he's a guy that I think is going to. If you get a lot of targets, the chance that just the rule of large numbers says the more targets that you get, the more opportunity for success that you're going to have. And so that's what we're talking about is the opportunity. So that's why I think on a site like FanDuel, like what you mentioned, the whole floor is basically the same for everybody, and it limits those sexy plays, so to speak. And so you have these middle of the pack guys, and at only 6,800 for a tight end, I don't think that's bad at all for someone who they said is going to be the number one option. So that's kind of how I'm looking at that situation. We'll see if it pans out. I might look like an idiot if he has 2 catches for 13 yards, but that's how I see it. As far as other guys I like, Jamaal Charles. I'm a huge Forte fan, and I think he has a solid week this week. Tuttle always makes fun of me because every week I say, how do you like this lineup? And it always has Forte in it. I think I've played him literally every week. So that would be, I like Forte, but I also like Charles. But you know what? I like playing them both. I really do. Last week on Draft Street and FanDuel, I played 2. Both lineups were running back heavy. I mean, Tuttle said it was laying the wood, and that's exactly what it was. And it ended up basically balancing out the terrible week that Aaron Rodgers had. So That's why
he was terrible's a little strong. He had 17 for a 15K salary, which isn't putting you on pace for much. But given what else was out there at the quarterback position, I mean, Andrew Luck returned less than 1 times. RG3 returned a little over 1 times. Like, it was basically Cam Newton and then all the cheap quarterbacks, and everybody else was terrible.
And I realized that. But he had, like, everyone thought he was going to have a great matchup, and you have to, like, the first half was bad. It was bad. That could largely be attributed, though, to the wide receiver injuries. You could tell he and Boykin were not on the same page. They were on 2 completely different pages there. I mean, he was looking at Boykin, and it was just basically the timing was terrible. Tuttle mentioned Boykin as an interesting play. I would agree with that because he has been getting the snaps, and I think he's going to be solid. But as far as Aaron Rodgers goes, he did terrible. But I mean, I'm not discounting the fact that everyone else did terrible as well. It's just the fact that he did terrible first. And, we just thought that he was going to have a great game that he did not have. And then it ended up being okay because no one else had great games either. Even Peyton Manning, who some people went cheap everywhere else for, basically he had a decent game. So hopefully I will be able to go running back heavy again this week and fill in those. I mean, I don't have a problem really with using Vincent Brown and Keenan Allen on the same team.
Yep. I can see that. I think that's a good GPP play as well. Yeah. And you mentioned Jared Boykin. James Jones missed practice again today. That's 2 missed practices in a row. That's not really a great sign. If James Jones is out, I think Boykin is definitely in play. And again, I would be more likely to use Boykin on sites with price differentiation like Draft Street than I would necessarily on Fanduel, especially when Fanduel's giving you the freebie with Keenan Allen. Boykin could be an interesting, fade Allen type play in GPPs, but for cash games, I'd rather take the safety and security of Keenan Allen. And then, that frees up enough salary cap room that I don't need to really worry about it too much in doubling up on cheap wide receivers there.
Yep. And I'm fully expecting Jones to be out this week. I don't think that they are going to be playing him. Miles Austin, this is the last question before we go because we're running late. Miles Austin, 32.56 on Draft Street. Do you take a flyer on him for the Thursday night games in case he plays? Because he wasn't at practice. However, I'm kind of getting mixed reports on Twitter about his availability for Sunday. 32.56.
Yeah, I'm not too enthused. I mean, the price is great, and it's a potential high-scoring game. He did miss practice today, which I don't like to see missed practices in the middle of the week. That's a downgrade. That's a concern for me. The head coach, Jason Garrett, said he didn't like the way Austin looked. So I would not be taking the risk on Thursday. Now, the question came up, I think Tuttle asked Miles Austin or Drew Davis. If Austin was healthy, I would still take my shot with Austin. I think he's a better player than Drew Davis. But given that he's not healthy and given that I don't think that many people are going to be on Davis as a whole, I think Davis is the more interesting GPP play as of this moment.
I would agree. Davis is definitely interesting. Miles Austin, I think even though he played last week when he was healthy, they still were looking at, healthy is a relative term with him, but they still, Terrence Williams obviously is eating into his production there, and they have Witten, and they used to have Murray, but a guy that I'm looking forward to bouncing back is Des Bryant because he disappointed a lot of owners last week. So that's how I see it. Drew, thanks again for joining us. For those that are tuning in to Insiders TV and those that are watching our recording, I appreciate you sticking with us. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat or on Twitter at SoccerDave, at Drew Dinkmeyer, and we will do our best to get back to you.
Absolutely.
Where's your air guitar? You're a little stiff there.
This is a song for the girl from